people. And then the pandemic hit, and there was 2 million people. And it just kept going and going, and I'm like, I don't know how to do this. Like, I'm terrified that I'm making some viral videos, and that's great, and maybe it kind of helps people, like, just for a second, but am I even really making any difference? I don't know what I'm doing here. And so I took that energy and I put it into trying to find mentorship, and I went after it. My dream mentor. He's a guy named Dr. Frank Anderson. I've taken a few of his workshops. And he's the lead trainer for something called internal family systems, which is a popular trauma style of therapy right now. And he co-wrote the manual with the founder, Dick Schwartz, and he was actually the on-staff psychiatrist at Bessel van der Kolk's Trauma Center. So you might know Bessel van der Kolk from The Body Keeps the Score. It's a popular book. And so he was on the first EMDR study with Bessel van der Kolk for that. He was the reason EMDR is, evidence-based, at least in part. And he, went to Harvard. Okay, he has all the pedigree. He's all like the wisdom. He's been doing this for 30 years. He probably knows how to do it. And so I was like, I'm going to go to him and try to talk him into mentoring me. And I was successful. This is a long story. It's kind of funny. I won't go into it. But it was kind of a trip trying to get him to mentor me. It was very expensive, but he did. And what he did was he sat with me every week, watched my counseling sessions with me. Like, did anyone do that in school? We had to record it. And I asked him to do this. I'm like, I want you to watch the tapes, and I want line by line. I want you to go with me, and I want you to show me what I could have been doing differently. And so he taught me the model over about 1.5 years. And just like, why'd you ask that question there? What'd you do this here? Did you notice that shift in body language? Did you notice how this happened and this happened? No, you went the wrong direction here. You misinterpreted that. That was your own theory. You pursued that instead of listening, instead of attending to this. And there was like this incredible shift that happened about over 1 year of, I feel like I'm starting to get it. And it really wasn't what I thought it was. I had in my mind that healing from trauma or healing from our resentments was this big, esoteric, hard, complex, abstract thing on the top of the mountain. And what I was coming to find was that it's a very sophisticated and complex thing to walk someone through the process of healing from trauma, but the actual act itself is so incredibly human. It's something that I think what you'll find is that each one of us actually intuitively knows quite well. It's not like we figured out how to heal from trauma in the last 100 years since psychology was born. We've been doing this since the dawn of time. And then I took on a similar apprenticeship under a guy named David Kessler. You might know him from his work on grief. So maybe you know the stages of bargaining and acceptance. I should probably know the stages if I'm going to talk about it. But yeah, he co-wrote those, and he's with Kubler-Ross, and then he's one of the leading experts on grief in the world. He spoke to the president, when he was grieving his son, and I've gotten to learn under him, and it was incredible. I started doing these workshops with Frank, and I have one coming out with David, and we've brought several 100,000 people through some of the online, just general public workshops that we've been doing on healing from trauma. Some of those just personal, some of them collaborating with Frank. And things have continued to grow in a way that I couldn't have even imagined. And getting to come around the world and have talks like this with you kind people is just, I had no idea under the stairs that was what was coming. And what's interesting is all that great success and all that exciting mentorship, none of that can really blunt the impact of a crisis when it hits your life. And last year I had one of those crises. It was a crisis of resentment and anger. No one tells you in your master's program how awkward it is to do your job when you go through a crisis. Like when your father has an affair, and your father has a relapse from an addiction, how going into session the next day is awkward when a third of your caseload are affairs. And you're like trying to help them work through stuff, or you're just thinking about your own parents, and your mom moves in with you and your kids, and you're just trying to wade through family crisis. It's not an uncommon crisis, right? I mean, my guess is probably all of you in this room, at least to maybe 1 or 2 degrees separated from infidelity in some way. I mean, know that that can be heavy in the moment, but it's common. I think for me, what I realized was that it wasn't just that I was angry at my dad for having an affair and then ultimately not wanting to reconcile with my mother and then leave. I was like mad about 30 years worth of ways that he let me down. I was mad about all of it. I was mad about just like the entire experience of feeling like I just really wasn't good enough for him. I really just wasn't interesting enough for him. And that he really just had better things to do. And really the only time that I deserved his attention when I was doing something wrong. And I was mad about all of it. And so like you have this event that happens in your life where he lets you down and you kind of just take all the stuff from the past and you just let it all come up in the present. You're not just mad about that thing, you're mad about the whole animal. And I just felt like I was burning with resentment. And if you were to meet my dad now, you would meet a really warm and emotionally present and kind and cuddly and bubbly guy that is so like, he's the kind of guy who would probably, if you met him, he would try to lean in and give you a hug. But he's also the kind of guy you'd probably receive it from because he's that warm and he's that sweet. And he won Teacher of the Year at the high school that he teaches at last year. The students love him and he's just such a warm and present man. And that wasn't the dad that I had access to as a kid. And I felt resentment for that. Maybe even a little bit more resentment for that after I saw how warm he was after he got later on in his life. And so what I want to tell you about is a bit of some of my own personal process and how I've worked through that resentment and how I worked through forgiveness. And I think what I've been trying to do over the past several months is work what I've found in my own personal experience to be very liberating into a broader theory of how I've seen healing trauma more generally, comparing that to the great works on forgiveness from folks like Worthington and Everett and Luskin and Desmond Tutu and just some of the Auschwitz survivors, trying to kind of build out a more comprehensive theory around what it means to heal from resentment, to move towards forgiveness. And I haven't been honest with you, I just kind of want to share some of my notes on that. It's not a formalized, I don't have it all worked out yet, but I want to share what I have so far, and maybe you can tell for yourself if I'm getting close to something, and maybe some of you will join me after this talk over there and tell me how I can make it better. But I want to share it, and it's deeply personal, but I really do think it could be helpful. And maybe I'll start with this. Maybe I'll start with what I think healing is not. I'm not convinced that healing is forgiveness. I don't think forgiveness is the catalyst of healing. I think forgiveness is the fragrance of healing. I think forgiveness is the byproduct of emotional healing from a relational wound, not the thing that actually heals itself. I'm going to make a case for that, and you'll have to tell me what you think at the end. You, sir, in the black shirt, what's your name? Say again? E.M.? G. Thanks, G. I'm not going to ask you any invasive questions about your dad, I promise. G, if I asked you to borrow your car after this, I'm out of town, I don't have a car, I'd like to kind of get around, would you be open to let me borrow your car? Absolutely not. Yeah, I respect that. You don't know me at all. Anyone that would? Is there anyone, by a show of hands, that would let me borrow their car? Really? Oh, you would? Thank you. What's your name? Javon? Javon. Thank you, Javon.